when I look at, the anti-woke kind of leftists, in a sense, even to have a political agenda implies that you're part of the ruling class. You're like, this should be done, that should be done. It's like thinking like a king, right? One of the things I really try to do is not to think that this way, and not to think in terms of agenda politics, because you're basically implying that you're a ruler in some sense.
More than half of my audience listening to this now and in the future will be left-wingers. No matter how many people call me a reactionary or try to smear me in that way, nonetheless, most of the people who listen to this stuff are themselves just kind of on the more anti-woke wing of the left wing. So I'm curious, you probably don't have too many opportunities to address this particular cohort. I'm kind of curious, you wrote
like
on...
people on the edge of being like, chopper heads and so forth.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, what would be actually kind of cool is if, weren't you or aren't you or don't you have a past as a very, unironic leftist? Can you tell us about the experience of being a junkie?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I'm still happy to identify as a leftist in some ways. As I get older, I get a little bit more socially conservative in certain dimensions. That's partially a life cycle effect. It's a pretty robust phenomenon, actually. But in many ways, my politics haven't really changed. My kind of cultural strategy for being a free person has changed. I've had to update that a lot. It was really, actually, you might be interested to know this, Curtis, that it was a blog post I wrote, the beginning of the end for me, and kind of the organized, institutionalized, kind of respectable left, was really a blog post that I wrote around 2017. I came to your blog very late, well after its heyday. I just came across people like you and Nick Land. I was an academic. I was holed up just reading only approved academic literatures and, just working in a cave on my academic research. And I came across your blog. I came across Nick Land's blog. And my initial kind of intuition was just like, oh, I thought all these right-wingers were supposed to be stupid, but these are clearly smart people with serious ideas. And I was honestly kind of naively shocked to discover, some real intellectual horsepower on blogs such as yours and Nick Land's. And I wrote a simple blog post in 2017 as an academic, very naive, just, kind of well-behaved academic, saying, hey, there are some people on the radical right who are actually really, really smart. And I actually read a lot of it, guys, and they don't seem that bad. They don't seem half as evil as people say. They're not endorsing any type of obvious harmful racism that I can see. Many, you and Nick Land are both at pains, actually, to reject white nationalism. And I was like, this is actually interesting. Smart people on the extreme right, that's actually a valuable thing to have in a genuine, free ecosystem of intellectual culture. So I tried to write this blog post to my...
You got a lot of positive feedback.
Well, this was the beginning, yeah. This was the beginning of the end for me. And so, yeah, I got in a lot of heat for that, and pretty much, make a long story short, that was when I pretty much... it was clear that wasn't allowed, to just simply say, hey, this stuff is worth paying attention to. And
I think you'll find generally that if people talk about a Voldemort, they're working for Voldemort.
Right. Well, yeah, so in any event, since you asked, that's when I was pretty much was like, my politics didn't fundamentally change. I've always been interested in a certain kind of radical left vision, which I see as associated with transgression and freedom and, a kind of cultural radicalism.
That's the bait.
Yeah, well, in any event. It was really then that was the beginning of the end for me. And so since then, I've been trying to occupy this space of not... because in some ways, I'm being baited by the culture, and I'm being baited by other left-wingers to become a right-winger. The more people call me, oh, Justin, you're a reactionary, you're a racist because you want to talk with people like Curtis Yarvin, in some sense, I can feel psychological attraction to owning that, right? I'm not a racist. I've never have been. I don't have many even right-wing attitudes or opinions, but the sociology of it is pushing me into it. And so I noticed that, and I think it would be it would be easy and self-serving to just join the right-wing groups. I'd be like, they wouldn't make fun of me or call me these nasty names. Right? I could just hang out with them. But then I realized, no, someone needs to hold this ground of an actual radical left that isn't on board with any of this woke bullshit and is actually just interested in truly radically free intellectual life, whether it be on the right wing or the left wing or whatever. And so, you asked me to kind of talk about that a little bit, so that's all that's relevant for here. I'm curious from your perspective, because you don't get to address many anti-woke leftists, presumably, just because of how you're perceived, and I think in many ways you're perceived quite unfairly. I'm just curious if you maybe have a particular unique message to the anti-woke left.
Well, I do have a lot of these conversations, but they're typically in private for obvious reasons.
Do you have a lot of friends who are leftists?
One or two. But I don't know. Friends is a strong word. Contacts, perhaps. Yeah. The thing is, when people use these words, right and left, these are very, very complicated, deep words, and people throw them around. You ever see that? Fake viral video of the chimp with the AK-47. These are words that are full of 200 years of history, and so to use them in a naive way, I think, is somewhat dangerous. Certainly, one of the things that I was noticing back, almost 15 years ago now, that I think is very commonplace, is that when people I think when you when you talk about, say, your anti-woke leftist, for example, they'll have this wonderful word, the professional managerial class, which is it's a lot of syllables. You just say the ruling class, or the governing class is a little less pejorative. I was certainly brought up in that class. My father was an American diplomat. I went to Johns Hopkins and Brown and Berkeley, and so I definitely wouldn't say that I have any thought of kind of committing treason to this class. Actually, I love these people; they're my people. Culturally, I can hang out with Middle Americans, but I'm much more likely to get along with elite blue state ruling class Americans. One of the things about this ruling class is that I think it's become very much kind of corrupted by power. I think its kind of merits as human beings, its intelligence, its ability to take standardized tests, its cleverness, these things have not dropped at all. But its effectiveness and its wisdom, I think, are much lower than they were in the age of Woodrow fucking Wilson. That's kind of the tragedy that I think needs to be addressed. And so in a way, you strip away layers and layers and layers and layers and layers, and sooner, before you know it, you're like debunking the fucking American Revolution, right? And